I'm Aaron Rutten, and to celebrate Halloween this year, I'm going to be illustrating a surreal nightmare I had when I was a kid. I'll also share a bit of my creative process, so let's get into it. First, some context. I think I was somewhere around 12 years old when I had this dream, but that's been kind of difficult for me to pinpoint exactly. I definitely wasn't an adult, and I don't think I was really young. I do recall feeling like a child in the dream though. It was a very short dream, I'd say about 15 to 30 seconds. It was also very dark, as in there wasn't much light, color, or detail. This is one of those dreams that was felt more than it was seen. Although it was only a brief impression, this dream really stuck with me. Because I wasn't able to see much in the dream, it is of course very difficult to translate this dream into a picture. As with any dream, it would be more accurate if you were experiencing it yourself, but I'll try to communicate it in 2D as best I can. Anyway, here's the dream as best I can describe it. I entered the dream inside an unfamiliar house at night. It was an older house, perhaps an impression of a typical house that I would have seen throughout the 80s and 90s. It looked like a family or maybe an elder lived there. It was tidy and decorated, but because it was so dark, I can't really say what the details were. There weren't any light sources inside the house like lamps or televisions, but there was some very faint light from outside seeping into the house through the windows. It could have been moonlight or streetlights, but it wasn't much. You could barely see enough to walk around without running into something. The house and being in the dark didn't feel scary, but all of a sudden I heard and felt very loud stomping as if people were running through the house. Since it was an older house, everything shook with each stomp. I remember standing looking toward the back side of a staircase. Perhaps I was in a kitchen or living room on the ground floor. I could see along the side of the staircase, which had a wooden railing. Suddenly, my attention was drawn to the staircase as down came two hairy ape-like creatures. They weren't actually apes, but that's what they most closely resembled. But let me again mention that it's very dark, so I can't really see more than silhouettes with very few features. So this is the part that feels the most like an impression rather than a clear picture I can visualize. The creatures felt very large. Not so large that they couldn't get down the staircase, so I would say as tall if not taller than an average adult. I recall feeling smaller than them, so I think that's why I must have been a child. The two creatures looked nearly identical, so I'd say they were meant to be twins. When you see me drawing these creatures, I will change their features periodically as I sort of get closer to what I remember. I will also have to increase the lighting so you can even see the creatures. It was much darker than this in my dream, but if I made the painting that dark, we wouldn't have much to look at. I got the impression that these creatures were adults, but sort of infantile. To me, that didn't feel harmless, but very dangerous because they were so powerful and reckless. I don't believe that they were benevolent because they looked very sinister with angry expressions and sharp carnivorous teeth. Despite the expressiveness, their eyes felt almost invisible. Dark voids with only the faintest hint of a feature. I struggled with how to illustrate this because they weren't just solid black voids, there was something perceptible there. Imagine how solid black eyes would look on a silhouette. You might barely catch some of the ambient light enough to see that there's a glossy eye in there somewhere, but you can't really see the outline of the eye. I recall a feeling of emptiness or vacancy in the eyes. It was as if the lights were on, but nobody was home. This added to the fear of what these creatures might do to me. Fortunately, they had no idea I was there. I recall being able to see more of a frontal view of the creatures, so somehow I had moved closer as they were reaching the bottom of the stairs and stomping around the corner. Everything was quite dark surrounding them, but now I was able to get the impression of the creatures' outfits, which I recall being consistent with the childlike persona they had about them. The suits they wore were something that you might dress a child in, sort of vintage with little hats. I seem to recall stripes, but I can't see how dense they were or what direction the stripes went. I do remember that there was a strong contrast, so since the creatures had very dark fur, the suits must have been white. I don't believe they were escaped convicts because they also had suspenders. So yeah, you can see why this dream stood out enough for me to remember it. There was nothing comical about the dream from my perspective though. I remember feeling terrified and I was sure they would have run into me. They never did. Suddenly, I woke up and the dream was over. I don't recall being scared by the dream afterward, but because it was just so weird and random, it has always been disturbing to me. If I were to speculate on what memories inspired this dream, I'd have to guess that it was a mixture of the animatronic gorilla and bear characters from Showtime Pizza and Chuck E. Cheese, which were terrifying in their own right, plus a little bit of Tweedledee and Tweedledum, who were also kind of creepy. In the end, this was about 13 hours of work spread out over 4 days. 10 of those hours were spent entirely on illustrating. I hope you enjoyed this spooky painting and have a happy Halloween.